number of our school systems are really, really struggling because they have not taken culture into account. This is one of the primary things that I get called upon by urban school districts, and I like to let them know that culture is the key. It's the critical mediating factor in increasing student achievement, especially for African American students. However, when you have teachers who are culturally incompetent, and I don't mean that in an insulting way,
Right,
I mean
right.
they're not fluent in our cultural ways. They're not fluent in the learning styles of black children, because scientific research has demonstrated that black children have unique learning styles. And once you understand those learning styles and employ them, it unleashes and releases the genius within those students. Now, notice, there must be an understanding that our children have that genius within them, that they already come to us with that brilliance. It is the job of the educator to educe or draw that out of them.
Okay.
So much of how public education has been structured is not structured for the greatest benefit of many of our children. And that's why there has to be a radical restructuring, taking culture into account and making that the foundation upon which we build. A lot of our children are learning about the greatness and the glory of other people's history and culture, as well as their views and values. And you can go, as I say, from pre-K to postdoctorate and still know nothing about your own historical accomplishments, views, and values.
That's absolutely right. You know, even just speaking with graduate students, I was on various campuses the other week attending graduations and serving as a lecturer. And some of our students know absolutely nothing about culture. Dr. Akua, can you paint an ideal picture? Can you just give a picture of what is culture? You know, what is black culture? So that our audience can kind of have an idea when you speak to culture being the key, so that they'll have an idea of what you're talking about.
I'm so glad that you asked that, because I don't want to assume that the words that I'm using, we may have different definitions, right?
Yeah.
So culture, according to Dr. Marimba Ani, is ordered behavior. And it doesn't take too long to look in many of our schools, families, and communities to see that things are out of order, right? Dr. Wade Nobles tells us that culture gives us rules for interpreting reality. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. When he says rules for interpreting reality, if I look at one of my sisters and I am not centered in the best of our culture, then I see her as the B word. Why? Because I have been miseducated to see her that way, right? So culture gives you rules for interpreting reality. When I am centered in the best of my culture, then I would see that as my sister, as a princess, as a queen.
Yes,
if I'm decentered, taken away from the best of my culture, then I would look at a brother and say that's just the N word, right? But if I am centered in the best of my culture, then I would see him as my brother, as a king, as a prince. And so this idea that culture gives us the lenses by which we see our everyday reality. And so we see ourselves as a great and wonderful people with incredible power, potential, and possibilities when we're centered in the best of our culture, because our culture gives us rules for interpreting that reality. But when we're disconnected from our culture, then we see ourselves as run down. Oh, that's what our people always do. We expect there to be tension and violence between black males and females in relationship. We begin to expect our communities to be run down. We begin to expect that our businesses fail, and that in our minds becomes the norm because we've been disconnected from the best of our culture.
So is that why sometimes African Americans don't support black businesses, because of that lack of identity with the culture?
Absolutely, because we have been programmed to think that other people's ice is colder and other people's sugar is sweeter. But I can prove it, Wanda. Check this out, because I ask audiences this all the time. Because they'll say, well, I tried to go to a black business and they messed up my order, or, I didn't get good service, the person behind the counter had an attitude, or the product wasn't right. Listen, I always ask the audience, I said, raise your hand if you've ever gone to a fast food restaurant, you've gone through the drive-thru, and they got your order wrong, okay? Of course, everybody's hand goes up, right? And then I ask, okay, hands down. Now, put your hand up if you went back to that same restaurant. and all the hands go up again. No
Yeah.
question, they go back to that same place that got their order wrong. But when it comes to a black business, man, there's this assumption that if they do me wrong once, that's it, right?
Wow.
And so we have to understand that when we're rooted in the best of our culture, we expect the best and we call forth the best from each other. That's one of the reasons I'm a part of the Buy Black movement, and I really encourage people to check that out at buyblackmovement.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know, so we've got to change our whole understanding of our culture. We've got to learn and know our culture,
Yes.
and then change our perception of how we treat and engage with our culture. That's very important. The number to call here, please give a call here to our guest, 404-892-2703. I'm going to see what Ron has to say. Ron, good morning. How are you? Good morning.
Akua.
Akua. Uh-huh.
Absolutely, absolutely. The best of our culture would benefit the most of our culture. The challenge is most people have never been exposed to it. Sure, absolutely. And one of my teachers, Dr. Asa Hilliard, taught us that it was black people who had the idea of instituting a public education system in the South, coming out of the research of W.E.B. Du Bois in the book Black Reconstruction. It was black people who instituted the idea of free public education for males and females and for all people, not just black people. So that was our idea. And in fact, we even had it in Africa, in the Nile Valley of Africa, free public education for males and females. Also in West Africa in ancient times, free public education for males and females. So it was very natural that when we got to America that we would institute the same thing. So these are our institutions, but oftentimes they're under alien control. And so we do have to get back control of our institutions because education, public education, is very, very much a cash cow, a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry, and many people outside of our community have discovered that and are now manipulating that system for their own greed and gain rather than for the uplift of our children. So yes, we have to go back and reclaim our public schools, but I also believe we must build private schools where we can determine our own destiny.
Steps to Black student success. More to come right here on 1380 WAOK. I'm Wandolyn Stokes. Stick around.
And I love intelligent black talk. And you getting it
That's
straight,
good.
no chaser. Listen to Dr.
Good.
F. Q. Slaughter.
Waking
News
us
and
up.
Talk 1380 WAOK.
Yeah, waking our mind.